Hi, my name's Paul Grogan and welcome to another Podblast. This time I'm going to be talking to Gil Hova about his new game High Rise, which was on Kickstarter and he then pulled it off Kickstarter and it's going back on Kickstarter again. So I thought that would be an interesting topic of discussion and I hope you enjoy it. So as always, thank you very much to all of my Patreon supporters. If you enjoy this Podblast and some of the other content that I create, then please consider supporting me over at patreon.com/gaming rules. And now on with the interview. So welcome back to the show, Gil Hova.
Hi, great to be back.
And the last time you were on the show, we were talking about Kickstarter campaigns.
Yep.
And we're going to be talking about that again.
Yep.
So just for those people who don't know, give us a quick introduction.
Okay, my name's Gil Hova. I am a game designer and publisher. I publish my own games through Formal Ferret Games. You may know me through the game The Networks, which is a game about building your own TV network. I also have a game called Wordsy, which is a word game that rewards longer words. And I have a game called Bad Medicine, which is a party game about pharmaceutical companies making awful drugs. I'm also co-host of the Ludology podcast with Jeff Engelstein. And soon Emma Larkins.
Yes.
Because Jeff is going to be departing the show, which is... So it was actually one of the first things Jeff told me when I joined. So I've known about this for like 2 years.
Right.
That he was going to be leaving. So I've had plenty of time to prepare myself, but still, you know, it's going to be a very big change for the show. Jeff,
yes.
He's been such a vital part of the show. Like he's been very adamant that it's not the Jeff show and it's not his show. So it started out with him and Ryan Sturm. So it was him and Ryan, then it became him and Mike, and then it became him and me. And he gives me a lot of control over the show. So him leaving is, you know, it's a big deal, but it's not the end of the show.
Yep. And
I'm really excited to see what Emma and I can do starting with episode 201.
Yep. And if you don't listen to the Ludology podcast, then you definitely should, because it's just fantastic. So
we do deep dive into board game design, which not a lot of other podcasts do. Some do, but Ludology's been doing it for a while, and I'm really excited to be a part of it.
Yeah, cool. Right, and you're based over in New York?
New York City metro area, Jersey City to be precise, which is just over the water. So I do all my playtesting in New York City.
Yep. And you live there with Carrie and a couple of ferrets?
That's right, yes. Yes, we're both asleep, both being the ferrets. Carrie's at work right now. Right. It is 11 a.m. local time as we record this.
Yep. So hence the Formal Ferret as the company name?
Yeah, I've owned various ferrets for the past 20 years. I'm crazy about them.
Right, cool. So your new game is called High Rise. Give us a quick synopsis of the game.
It is a city building game with a little bit of corruption. The idea is it's got a one-way time track that you go around the board on, similar if you've played Tokaido or Glenmore. Very similar mechanism. The player furthest behind on the track, it's their turn to move. And if you can make a really huge jump if you want, but you'll have to wait for everybody to catch up. There's a couple of twists in that mechanism that I put in. There's some rewards for making big jumps, which a lot of games with this mechanisms don't have. Yeah, so there's some really agonizing decisions in the game because it's a game of trade-offs. If you do action A, you will not be able to do action B, and you really have to decide at many points of the game, okay, I'm going to get to do what I want, but what is it that I want? And that's really the tricky part of the game. When you go onto these different points of the board, you're going to be picking up building material, which you'll wind up putting into your buildings, and every material equals a floor. You have to match blueprints. The building material is of 5 different colors, and every floor in your building is a point. So if you're able to match a blueprint that calls for 5 building material, that is 5 floors, that is 5 points.
Okay.
And you score points that way. And the buildings are represented. They were represented, and we're going to get into this in a moment, but this is the important bit. During the year and a half that I play tested the game, the buildings were represented by stackable pieces, and towards the end, I actually decided to swing for the fences and make plastic stackable pieces. That ballooned the price of the game to $100, and when I launched it on Kickstarter, that was not a popular decision, shall we say. Yeah. There were plenty of people who did back it, but the funding goal was very high, the pledge level was very high, and the very convincing feedback I got from my backers was that, or people who wanted to back the game but couldn't because the price was too high, was that the price needed to come down.
Yeah.
So I've spent the last 3 weeks retooling the game, removing the stackable pieces that have been such a part of the game, and at first I was really worried. The heart and soul of the game for a while was the stackable pieces. How is the game going to work without the stackable pieces? And it was such a relief when I found a solution. It was Heiko and me, so I can't take full credit. Heiko Gunther. I got to get that name closer to right. That's not right either, but at least it's in the ballpark.
Enough. Yeah.
So Heiko's the graphic designer of the game. He did graphic design for the networks. He's also done graphic design for games like Potion Explosion, Tesla Versus Edison, and the Black Box edition of Glory to Rome. So Heiko and I brainstormed over a couple of calls, and we decided that the way to do it would be to have the buildings be represented by long strips of punchboard. And the tallest building is about 230 centimeters or so, which is just a little over a foot. It's like, I wouldn't say it's like a foot and change.
Yeah. Okay.
For American listeners, for listeners everywhere but America, it's about 230 centimeters is the tallest building.
Well, you're speaking to somebody who's 49 years old this year, so feet and inches works for me.
Yes, that's true. You probably know how many shillings were in a pound before decimalization?
Decimalization came in, I think, the year I was born or the year after I was born.
Oh, okay. So not quite that old.
Not quite, but there was 12. But anyway.
Just quick aside, I was watching a Monty Python episode, and they actually had a gag about joining the EU at the time, or at least joining Europe at the time, because at the time that was the thing. So that was an interesting bit of a time capsule there.
Yes.
And then they made a gag about decimalization. But anyway. Where was I? I was talking about these punchboard strips. That's what the buildings are going to be on now, and because they're so tall, they actually look really good. The only thing I need to make sure of is my plant said, okay, we've got these 20 millimeter plastic bases that you can put your pieces in, and I said that's just not going to be big enough. We need twice the size. We need like 40 millimeter plastic bases. So we're talking about exactly what kind of bases we need, but I think we're going to have something that's going to work, that's going to be stable. And so I'm working on a lot of the little pricing details now, but we're recording this podcast on the last week of February, and I am most likely launching in the first week of March.
Yeah, this podcast is probably going to go out today because I'm flying to the Czech Republic at 5 o'clock tomorrow morning. So
wonderful!
Yeah, so
I hear there is a game cafe in Prague that has a copy of Wordsy, which I was really happy to hear about.
No, it's not a holiday, I'm afraid.
No, of course not. I'd imagine, I know all the work you do for CGE, so I'd imagine it's got something to do with that.
So so this will be launching either 26th of February or 27th of February, and you're going back on Kickstarter next week. So it was first on Kickstarter, 3 weeks ago now?
Yes, it would be about 3. I'm going to check my calendar over here.
How many days?
Just over 3 weeks ago.
How many days was it on Kickstarter before you pulled it?
1 day.
Wow.
One single day. I mean, I try to be really plugged in to what people are saying, and I just got too much. So there were two overall problems of the campaign. The first problem is I don't think I did a good enough job communicating how many plastic pieces were in there, because people are saying, well, Reef it isn't $100. And I'm like, well, first off, Reef is printing at an order of magnitude bigger than me, you know?
I'm going to be just a few more copies.
Yeah, I'm going to be printing maybe 5,000 units or so.
Yeah.
They're printing about 50,000 units at a time. And when it comes to manufacturing, generally there is an economy of scale with most materials. So definitely with plastic, the more copies you print at once, the more value you get out of your print run. That's the first thing. And the second thing is that my game had maybe 3 times as much plastic as Reef does.
Okay.
So those were the two reasons behind there. So I had to charge a lot for it, and I had to have a very high funding goal because I needed. If I funded with like $50,000, that wouldn't have been enough, and that would have been a real disaster. I think that was the last time we spoke. You know, we talked about real failures when it comes to Kickstarter, because to me, I mentioned this on Ludology a few weeks ago when we had Stephen Bonacore as guest. What happened with the High Rise campaign is not. Like, people are going to look at it as, like, some people might see it as a failure, and fair. If you want to see it like that, fair enough. But a lot of people see failure as an ending, an end to the road, and I don't think that's a healthy mindset. You know, if you don't do something right, you learn from it, you can go back. A lot of times you can go back and fix it. Yeah. There's some people who pay so much attention to getting it right. Like, there are some times when you need to get it right 100% of the time. Like, if I'm a doctor, if I'm going in for surgery, I want my surgeon to be right 100% of the time.
Yeah, if that fails, that's bad news.
But in a creative field, failure can be very, very interesting, and it can get you places where you need to go. Like, so this was something that needed to happen, I think, because up until then, the feedback I got from playtesters was extraordinary. They really, really wanted the game. But the problem was it was only people who had played the game who got that. People who had not yet played the game were not convinced. And that was the first problem, was we didn't make it clear what the value was. Right. Now, even if we did do that and we had people who were okay spending $100 on a campaign, even if we had them on board, I still probably would have stopped it early, because I think the people who wanted the game for a little less, they didn't want to pay $100 for the game, I think those people were a lot closer to my audience. Right. Okay. And the people I'm selling to. So that is why I really took that feedback very seriously. I took it to heart. And when we relaunch, the game is going to be closer to about $60. Right. Which is still not, it's not like a $20 game. I mean, there's going to be a lot of punchboard in this game, but I think it's in a much different league. It's almost half the price than what it was. Yeah. And the total funding goal is going to be a lot lower also. Yeah. And between those two things, and adding the fact that we did raise $20,000 in that one day where we were on, I feel like we're gonna do okay. Yeah. But you know, there's still a lot of little things I need to do. I need to revamp the main campaign video so it doesn't have stackable pieces anymore. I need to update all the campaign graphics to remove all the references to stackable pieces. Yeah. I'm still getting pieces of the quote from my manufacturer to make sure that I can bring this in at a price that is realistic. So there's still some work to do, but I think by next week we'll have something. Yeah, so hopefully going live at the start of March. I mean, I was following you on Twitter, and I remember when you obviously posted and said you've pulled the campaign and the reasons why, and then you did your first test with the punchboard, and you were like, it works, and there was this sense of, you know, relief, but also enormous relief. Yeah, enormous. But also, now, are you going to be offering the plastic pieces as a deluxe add-on or anything like that? No, not yet. Right. I want to focus on making this the best possible game I could in punchboard. A lot of that is because, you know, I have deadlines to hit, and one of them is I want to see if I can get an air shipment in for Gen Con. Yeah. And if I'd launched with plastics in March, and I would have wrapped up the campaign, or I'd be wrapping up the original campaign by now, and that would be a realistic timeline. If I'm working with plastics now at the start of March, I wouldn't be able to get the plastics ready for Gen Con, and in fact, the work on the plastics would slow everything else down, and I'm not sure I could even get the base game ready for Gen Con. And so, with that time crunch, with losing that month, I'd rather focus on making the game the best possible game it could be in punchboard. Yep. And then once, if it proves that it's got a following, people are excited about it, people enjoy the game for the mechanisms. And I think the punchboard version looks absolutely fantastic. Right. But if they enjoy that, then next year I can launch with a campaign for a plastic deluxe version or a plastic expansion. Obviously, I'm not sure how it would look yet because this is still possibly a year away.
Yeah.
And that's not a guarantee or a promise. I mean, it's possible that I may not launch it. Well, it all depends on demand. But I will say one thing I should have mentioned before, and this is actually a big part of moving over to Punchboard. There were 2 lucky accidents I think we had. One isn't really an accident, but the fact that we have Kwanchai Moria working on the art means that in Punchboard we now have more canvas for Kwanchai to work in. So the Punchboard will have Kwanchai's gorgeous building art on all of the Punchboard, which looks amazing.
Yeah, I mean, I know art is, you know, I'm of the opinion that graphic design is objective. You can have good graphic design, you can have bad graphic design, you know, like yellow text on white backgrounds. But artwork is very subjective, and what some people think is gorgeous, other people might think is absolutely awful. The artwork for this game, in my opinion, is absolutely gorgeous. And I know I'm in the majority because all I'm seeing about the game is the gorgeous artwork. So I'm sure there's some people out there who don't like it. But, you know, it is pretty amazing. So I'm with you on that. The more of that artwork that's visible in the game, the better. Yeah,
it's going to be a really good looking game. And so that was one of the things that's like, hey, by going to Punchboard, we give more prominence to Kwanchai's art, and that is a really good thing.
Yeah.
The second good thing about this is well, this is a happy accident. I did such a crappy job explaining what the value of the plastic was and showing how the game looked with the plastic last time, that I think this campaign is going to feature the game in a better light and feature the art for the game in a better light. Like, people will have a much better idea of how the game is going to look and in the campaign. And so I think the bad job I did on the first campaign is going to help me on the second campaign in a weird way. That is not a Kickstarter tip. Do not take that as advice. That is really crappy advice.
Yeah. I mean, speaking of Kickstarter, obviously various people have got their opinions on what Kickstarter should be used for, and obviously there are some big companies out there using Kickstarter that, you know, theoretically don't need to use Kickstarter. What you've done with Kickstarter, and you absolutely do need to use Kickstarter for what you're doing,
100%, yeah,
is perfect. You've put it out there, people spoke, you've taken it down, you've gone away, you've made changes. It's not cost anybody any money apart from you and your time.
Yeah, and I'm fine making that because that's ultimately going to make the game better, and that's Kickstarter working as designed. That's how Kickstarter, in my opinion, supposed to be.
Yep.
Now, in terms of big companies using Kickstarter that may not need to, there's a ton of reasons why companies use Kickstarter, and let me preface this by saying I don't want to sound like I'm defending them. I want to give more context to people might be like, well, why are these huge companies on Kickstarter? Well, the first reason is Kickstarter is an amazing marketing platform.
Yep.
And companies that use it get a real benefit out of it.
Huge.
Enormous benefit out of it. So even if they can't afford it, they still win by using Kickstarter.
Yep.
Now, it's the fact that Kickstarter started as something aimed as more of a grassroots thing, the fact that publishers like me have to go up against publishers like them, that is a definite argument. But I mean, it's not like these publishers are hurting themselves by going on Kickstarter. Quite the opposite. It is something that absolutely helps them because there's no other pre-order platform that works the way Kickstarter does. And I'm using the words pre-order platform because that's how they're using it, not how I'm using it.
Yeah.
But the second part is, even those big publishers, sometimes they put out like an oddball project, like a big box version of a game, and they have no idea what the demand is.
Yep.
The demand could be 2,000. The demand could be 20,000. They just don't know what the print run is. And another big feature of Kickstarter is the relative demand before you hit print.
Yeah.
And that is such an enormous piece of intelligence to have that I can see why a lot of big companies want to push their big box games onto Kickstarter, because when they go to the printer, they're secure in the knowledge that they're going to get their print run about right.
Yeah.
I mean, there was a lot of talk about what happened with Wingspan a couple of weeks ago, and Jamie was in an absolute no-win situation there. Like, he tried to get intelligence the best he could, and if anybody is is going to do the best they can. It's Jamie.
It's Jamie, yeah.
Jamie is not someone who's just going to roll out of bed and say, I'm just going to print 10,000 this time. He agonized over this decision. Yeah. And when it turned out to be too few, I mean, what can you do? None of us are psychic. None of us can tell the future. So, and keep in mind, I mean, some people are like, well, it's Jamie Stegmaier. He had Scythe. He should know. Well, keep in mind, Charterstone, it was successful, but not as successful as Scythe was. No. And it's possible, I don't know the numbers here, but if he had printed too many units of Charterstone, it would stand to reason that a game like Wingspan, where, again, he has no idea of the demand because he's not on Kickstarter anymore, he's going to have to try to get intelligence somehow. So he went out to distributors and asked distributors what they thought, and the distributors, they're human also. Like, they're not psychic, so they're going to try to come up with the best possible number they can, and that number turned out to be too low. I mean, that happens. Generally, with publishers, the advice is, if you would choose between printing too few rather than print too many, print too few because you can always print more.
Yep.
Whereas if you print too many, now you've got a problem. You've got too much inventory. You don't know how to move it. You're paying warehousing fees. You're paying extra taxes. It is a huge expense printing too many copies. And of course, there's the extra money you spent printing, which is now capital that's locked up. It is really bad business to print too many copies.
Yeah. And for those regular listeners of mine, podcast 67, which is recorded and edited but hasn't gone live as I'm talking to you now, but probably will later today, I talked to Frank West, designer of City of Kings, and we covered this same thing again, and he was talking about, the logistics of, you've printed 2,000 more than you needed to, and now you've got to pay for the warehousing fees. So
exactly.
But anyway, bringing it back to Kickstarter and how this has worked for you, it's been absolutely beneficial, because if Kickstarter didn't exist and you went, I'm going to print this game, and I've got some funding, and I've borrowed some money off Paul, and here we go, and I'm going to print 5,000 copies, and then a year later, there are 4,000 copies still sat in your warehouse because everybody's saying, it's a nice game, but it's too expensive. You've avoided that, because that's what would have happened. People would have taken a risk, gone out there, and you see it now. You see it with some publishers who do not use Kickstarter, is they make games, and then a few years later, you see them all in the bargain bins because it came out, wasn't popular, and that's just how it is. Now, these are big companies, they can soak up that loss. When you're a one-man band like you, no chance.
And another factor is a lot of those games had no platform to launch off of.
Yeah.
They were just released into the ether, and a lot of times they were released maybe with 5 other games from the same publisher at the same time, and it just becomes this Darwinian situation. Whereas with Kickstarter, there is an established audience for the game. There's people who have the game when the game is released. Now, you've got some other issues with that. Like, for example, you got all this buzz when the Kickstarter launches, the Kickstarter funds, and then it's like 6 months of relative inactivity. You know, on my end, there's a lot of activity, finalizing the graphic design, sending it off to the publisher, and waiting on pins and needles for the shipment to arrive. But for the outside world, it's like everything goes dark, and then 6 to 12 months later, presto, there's the game, and is there still demand? We're not sure. Yeah. But the fact that, number one, there's going to be like anywhere between 500 and 3,000 people, maybe more, who now own the game and will take it out to gaming groups and start showing the game around just in time for it to hit stores. And number two, the fact that there's already been ink and buzz for the game. It's already in the consciousness, and somebody looks at it on a store shelf and they say, I remember when that game was on Kickstarter. That's already 2 advantages that the game has ahead of the game that just gets released into the ether.
Yeah. Cool. Right. Let's wrap things up. We were originally going to be 10 minutes. We've been 25, which is fine, because we've had a...
That's me. That's all on me.
we've had a really interesting discussion about it. But just to summarise, High Rise, Gil Hova's new game, was on Kickstarter, pulled after one day for the reasons we've discussed, going back on Kickstarter with new punchboard instead of plastic, probably next week.
Yeah, first week of March.
And hopefully you'll have a copy at Gen Con.
Yes, I should have copies of Gen... That's not a promise. That's not a promise. That is an estimate. I'm going to work towards that. I can't guarantee it.
Yeah, and I will hopefully be at Gen Con, and I might do another little video log again, and I might come around and do a short video of it, if I can find you. Oh, that'd
be amazing.
Because I think I tried to find you last year, and the only day that I had any free time, I woke up with a horrendous migraine,
Oh, yeah.
And I spent an hour rushing around the halls and hardly found anybody. But anyway.
And last year was weird also because I spent a lot of my time playtesting High Rise.
Right.
So I was not at the booth because we didn't have the space in the booth to show the game off. So I was in the event hall half the time.
Yeah.
So I wasn't. Hopefully this year I can be at the booth for a little more time.
Right. But I will see you at Origins before that, or not?
Absolutely, you'll see me at Origins.
I'll see you
Looking
at
forward
Origins.
to it.
Excellent. Right. Well, thank you very much for coming on the show and for your, being honest and describing the process of how the game went on Kickstarter for you. And good luck with it when it relaunches next week.
Thanks so much, Paul. This has been a blast. Thank you.
Cheers, Gil. So that's the end of the interview. I hope you've enjoyed it. And one thing that I need to mention is I did ask for people to send in questions in advance on the BGG Guild. And unfortunately, I completely forgot, and Gil forgot as well. So what I'm going to ask Gil to do is to go onto the BGG Guild and actually answer the questions on there. So for those people who did ask the questions on the BGG Guild, Gil will be putting the answers as a reply to the thread on there. So apologies for that, but we both completely forgot. So as mentioned at the start, if you like this Podblast and any of the other content that I create, then please consider supporting me over at patreon.com/gaming rules. And until next time, take care and thanks for listening.